Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Mattan Griffel with us. Mattan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, guys. Hey, everyone.
Hey, so let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself. How did you become interested in growth hacking? We'll kind of start there, and then we'll move into some of the specifics that you do to kind of help the world with growth hacking. But how did you initially get interested in it?
So I actually didn't study anything related to marketing or growth hacking or even startups. I studied finance and I studied philosophy at NYU.
So did I. I've studied philosophy myself.
Awesome. We could talk a lot more about that. And that basically ensured that I'd be unemployable.
That's what liberal arts does.
That's right. So I was referred to a startup actually out of college, and they liked me, and they needed to create a role for me, so they actually had me do their marketing. And I didn't know anything about marketing at the time. So, you learn about a topic. How do you learn about a topic you know nothing about? You go through all the online resources, you take classes, whatever's available. I was lucky that out here in New York City, the General Assembly was sort of just starting, and so they had a lot of classes on both marketing and advertising and all of that when it comes to startups. And so I was able to, while I was actually there, digest as much as possible and then figure out what was actually relevant and what was not. And I found that a lot of the stuff you learn about and a lot of the resources out there are pretty useless when it comes to startups. I'm glad that I never studied marketing in college because they teach you about efficiently spending your advertising dollars and how to conduct consumer focus groups and all of these things that are essentially impossible for a startup to do because they have no money to spend on advertising, essentially. So I basically learned the stuff that worked. I threw out the stuff that didn't work. I tried everything. And the company, it was called App Savvy. We grew to about 80 people. We did 40 million in revenue the first year that I was there. And I learned a lot, and by the time that I left there, I had a bunch of friends and other startups just knocking at my door asking me to do the same thing for them. I didn't necessarily want to have to pick one, and I thought that there was a lot of help that I could do for all of them if I just sort of put them on the right track. So I started a company, basically, to help them more of a consulting capacity. Before that, I actually took a month off and I learned, I taught myself how to code. So I learned Ruby on Rails.
You just did that in a month, huh?
Yeah, I went out to San Francisco about a year ago in August, and I wanted to build an application, and so that's what I did, and I built the application. And then when I came back, I had this sort of marketing expertise combined with the interest in the technical side, actually implementing some of the analytics tools, for example, or even tweaking the product from a marketing standpoint. And so more and more I saw that there was an interest in case studies about what startups did, like some interesting line or strategy they used that suddenly got them a bunch of new users or suddenly got them a bunch more engaged users. And I started trying to look between the lines and figure out what are some of the more general principles that we could pull out of these case studies that we're seeing so that we could actually teach people things beyond just here's a story, and if this is relevant to you, then you can use it, take what you will. So that's turned into, we now do a growth hacking agency here out of New York City, the first in the world. I'm officially a growth hacker with Quotidian Ventures, which is a New York City venture firm. And we advise probably dozens of startups, and we've got the site now, growhack.com, and meet up here in New York City and several other places, and I'm currently working on a book on growth hacking. So it's been really interesting, and it's also helped sort of augment a lot of the other projects that I'm working on too.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of come together in a unique way for you. You didn't really follow any traditional standard path, but in a sense, I think that's what makes a great growth hacker. It takes some base level understanding of a number of disciplines and then having the wherewithal to kind of bring it together and make something meaningful out of it. So it's really interesting hearing your backstory a little bit. You said you now have the website up, GrowHack. That's growhack.com, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. What are you doing with GrowHack? It seems like you have a partner there. Tell us what that kind of encompasses.
So GrowHack is, I'm more interested in the academic side of it, in actually thinking out some of the models that I'm teaching about. We teach classes both at General Assembly and on Skillshare and on Udemy and a number of different places.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm developing a lot of the ideas and the frameworks and the material. My partner actually came in because I started getting so many inquiries about doing this for companies.
Uh-huh.
And personally, I'm not all that interested in the consulting model.
Uh-huh.
I'm more interested in the thinking about this stuff.
Uh-huh.
So he's been leading that business and doing really well.
Yeah.
The site itself is, we try to highlight interesting growth hacks every week, and we put case studies up there, and it's been a pretty big driver of awareness. Although the biggest thing has been when I put up the slides for my class on SlideShare, and those have been viewed over 115,000 times.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And so you have a partner. Does he do the consulting, and you're kind of the academic brains behind the service?
We both do the consulting, although at the end of the day, you've got to have one person leading, each division. So he is essentially the pass off the sales to him, and he's account manager for making sure these guys are happy and making sure that we're delivering when we need to deliver.
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the reasons I was really interested in having you on the show, is because a lot of people do it. Or I shouldn't say a lot. Some people do it. Even fewer people understand kind of conceptually what they're doing. And as I looked at all the stuff you have going online, I didn't know you had a degree in philosophy, but now it makes complete and total sense. I mean,
Right.
with a degree, like that, you're used to mapping out large chunks of information in digestible ways so that it can be kind of consumed. And when I see what you've done with growth hacking through the blog, through your classes, and through all your different media outlets, it shows that you have a real broad understanding of what's actually going on in the space. And that's kind of what I want to get into next, because I really want to pick your brain, because there's not a lot of Mattans in the world doing that kind of thing, which I think is awesome. So you taught a Udemy class. It's got a lot of students. The reviews, everyone raves about it. What led you, first of all, to create the Udemy class? Was it just a lead gen? Was it an outlet because you had too much inside and you had to get rid of it somehow? Why did you go to Udemy, and how'd that begin?
How did the jump to Udemy begin? I've got my class that I do at General Assembly, and I do both growth hacking, and I also teach a class on how I taught myself how to code for people who are interested in that.
Quick side note, isn't that the highest grossing class on Skillshare?
Twice, actually.
That's incredible.
It was in November. We had 1,600 students, the highest grossing class they've ever had, and we're launching another one on March 12th, and we're at we just broke 1,500 today.
And it's going to be the same class, or?
It's going to be, I've actually tested out different variations of it. So I tested it the second variation didn't perform as well. So I'm back to the first one, and it's just taking off from there.
A true growth hacker, A/B testing his own courses on Skillshare.
Yeah, and that's sort of what Udemy is like as well. When you have this content, there are many different ways to present the content, and so the Udemy class ended up just being, it ended up kind of being a repository for all of this information that I'm putting together. But what I did originally was just record the class that I was already delivering at General Assembly, and put that up online for people that aren't in New York City to have access to it.
Yeah.
But we've done meetups here, and so we've been able to record videos of people like Noah Kagan talking about how to get customer loyalty, or Cassie Lancelotti Young talking about cohort analysis, and start to include that in the class. And that's been really cool for people to get access to that content too.
Yeah, I want access to that content.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. It's really nice.
Do that. I was looking through some of the reviews on your Udemy class, and this one kind of stood out to me. It was from Andrew Dumont of SEO Moz. He said, by far the best description and practical advice on growth hacking that I've seen. That's quite an endorsement. He's not a
Thanks.
nobody, and he's saying this is one of the best things he's seen in terms of the way you describe it and,
That's
and the
right.
kinds of advice you give. Let's talk about the description a little bit, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of descriptions being thrown around. There's a lot of definitions. Some people love the word, some people hate the word, some people don't even understand the word. But I feel like you do have a grasp on what it does, what it means to be a growth hacker. So how do you define growth hacking, and how do you see it relate to the whole lean startup movement as well?
Totally. It's something I've thought a lot about, and it's been troubling me too as a philosopher to try to come up with the most concise and most meaningful definition.
There you go. What are the necessary and sufficient conditions, right?
Yeah, so I'm not so interested in whether it was meaningful when it was first created. It may have been created as a marketing term. I really don't care, because I think that there is something meaningful to it. There's something there, and if we can make it more academic, there's definitely value to it. And I think any term that gets created that people start using, it usually happens. And I like to give people the benefit of the doubt that they do it, that it happens for a reason.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to growth hacking, it both identifies a shift in mentality and how startups think about both growing but also operating in general. I think it's bigger than just like growing, and I think it's how are we going to run businesses in the future. And I think when you look at some of the most successful startups in the world, like Airbnb or Facebook or Zynga, like they never followed the rules that were taught in business school. They did things a different way, and I think we're going to start teaching things the way startups are actually doing them. So I think growth hacking in some way encapsulates all of that. If I had to give one definition, a lot of people talk about Andrew Chen saying it's a hybrid of marketer and coder, which I think is it's a heuristic, and it's that's what people point to. It's not very helpful, because you put a marketer and coder together and who knows what you're going to get.
You may not get a growth hacker.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think growth hacker is it's really a practice, it's an activity, it's like a role at a company for the person who's responsible for figuring out problems related to the user life cycle. We talk about growth of users in general, but it's not just, that doesn't mean growth of traffic to a website. That's one kind of user, but you really have many kinds of users. So you're ultimately figuring out growth of active users, engaged users, and then at the end of the day, monetized users, users you're making money off of. So the way I've got this lean marketing funnel as a framework that I've come up with. It's derived from Dave McClure's R metrics, and I think it's a good way of thinking about the entire user life cycle. But there's really the 5 big stages of getting someone to your site who's never heard of you, getting them to sign up, getting them to become active, getting them to refer their friends, and then making money off of them. And that's really all that there is. Yeah. Right. And so as a growth hacker, your job is to really know that funnel and know how it works for you inside and out, decide where we're going to be focusing our time on now and what we're going to be doing to try to improve, say, activation rates or retention rates. So it could be, the CEO of a company. I think more and more we're going to see job titles like head of growth. And we're already seeing companies like Airbnb have 15 people growth teams. I think organizations are going to be reshifted around that, where instead of having a marketing team and an engineering team and an operations team, we're going to have an acquisition team that consists of a marketer and an engineer and an operations guy and an activation team and a retention team. But back to your question about how it ties into lean marketing, I see growth hacking and the hacking part specifically as this whole process applied to really early stage companies. So you have the lean idea that a lot of people have tapped into for figuring out how do you know if your product is actually valuable with customer development and hitting product market fit. But the problem a lot of startups are facing now is that what do you do after you hit product market fit, right? So you have a product that people want and there's value, but how do you continue to operate the company in a lean way? And there's no answer to that yet. It's sort of so I think that's growth hacking, and I think that takes off of where the Lean Startup by Eric Ries left off. Right? Once you get to that point, how do you then grow the company in a lean way? And I think that's why I think growth hacking is lean marketing. That's why you need one guy who's very much a generalist, because when you're two people at a startup and you hire a third guy and he's your growth guy, well, he's going to have to do everything. He's also going to need to know how to code, because if he's just coming up with ideas and then relying on some other person to actually execute them, if he has to keep talking to an engineer to keep testing everything out, he's going to be a liability rather than an asset.
Yeah.
Right.
So taking resources instead of giving resources.
I think that's where the idea of marketer plus coder comes in, is that you need to know what your goal is, how you're going to be trying to change it, what the test is, and then actually building the test yourself. Yeah. Otherwise, you're not going to be coming up with tests fast enough to make a significant difference at a startup.
Absolutely. So it's not that you just happen to know how to write code. It's that you understand marketing very deep, and then you use the code to kind of support that endeavor. Because if you just happen to know marketing and happen to know engineering, and you put them together, it may not work unless you really make them work together.
That's right.
Yeah, and I love the way you kind of see growth hacking, because it seems like you see it as the growth hacker is the one person or the team of people that truly understand users, whether it's how to get users initially in the door, whether it's how to move them through the funnel, whether it's how to retain them, build community around them, help them after you've monetized them, support them. It seems like the growth hacker is really the user evangelist through the entire process. They're the person that just really gets the psychology of a user. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, what I like is that it helps answer a lot of questions too that you'll have inside a company. You'll often have people in like the boardroom debating about whether whether you should put this pop-up before a user gets to the dashboard when they first log in, right? And people will talk about the pros and cons, and like at the end of the day, the growth hacker is the guy who says like, I have a great way of testing this, and we can know whether it's going to be valuable based on how it actually affects how people use the product, right? If we show it to people and we see that people are more engaged with the product, then it's valuable and we're going to do it. And if they're not, then there's your answer right there.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. In your course on Udemy, one of the things I noticed is that when you teach growth hacking, you have this picture of a iceberg, right? With a little bit above the water and a lot below the water. I think, what is it like with icebergs, 10% or less is actually above the water. And on the top of it, you have a couple words, and then below the surface, you have a lot of words. And that's kind of how you show sort of all the disciplines that go into growth hacking. Walk us through that a little bit, and I'm sure I'll put it on the screen for our viewers as well, so they'll actually see it maybe as you're talking about it a little bit. But talk us through the iceberg, because I really love that image.
Yeah, I love the iceberg as a metaphor, even though I found out, sadly, that image is Photoshopped. But
that's all right. It still looks awesome. Who cares?
Yeah. So I think what happens is a lot of people point to startups that they see, that have had successful, like extremely successful growth. Companies like Pinterest or Instagram or Zynga, where they see viral growth and they're like, that's what I want. What's really happening with growth hacking is that the viral growth is that tip above the water of the iceberg. That's like that 5 or 10%. That's the sexy part of growth hacking, and that's what everyone wants, obviously, and that's what everyone sees, and that's what happens when growth hacking is done well, right? It looks easy, and it looks like obviously this product grew because people want it or whatever. You take for granted that there's below the level so much stuff going on, and all of these different things that have to work together. And if any one of them doesn't work, you're not going to get the kind of viral growth you need. And so some of the things that I include on that slide are like landing page optimization and SEO and search engine marketing, PR, behavioral economics. I think at the core of it is analytics, and that's very important. But this gets to the point you brought up before, which is that growth hackers in many ways are generalists. Because for any startup, there may be a different answer. Some startups need SEO. For some startups, SEO is like the key. Mint.com, for example, had tremendous success creating content for their audience because they were created at a time where no one was serving like the younger professional who needed financial help. They had questions about how do I file my taxes or how do I set up an IRA. There was no content for that, so they created a blog, and that was number one in personal finance and drove a lot of traffic to them.
Yeah.
But these days, SEO is not such a great strategy for most startups. And so it doesn't make sense for a startup, for example, to hire an SEO expert or an AdWords expert, because that may not be the answer for you. There's, for you, no amount of optimizing AdWords may make you, a successful company or make your product successful. Yeah. So you've got all these different things, and you need to know enough about each one to be able to test out whether you think there's an opportunity there. Like, you need to know at least, how do I set up a really simple AdWords campaign in a weekend, and how will I know if there's something there, right? And then if there is, well, you also have to be humble enough to go and learn about that thing and not assume that you know everything. Yeah. So as like a growth hacker, you're always learning about what's some new strategy or new channel, and not assuming that anything is out of question. Like maybe radio advertising is the right thing for you. Who knows? Yeah. But so I think what happens is when all of these little pieces they fit together, then you have something that sort of tips the scale and becomes viral growth. A lot of people don't really realize that viral growth is actually a few different stages, right? Like, if you have a user who shares your product with 10 of their friends, well, 10 of their friends get to your site, right? But then you need to convert those people, and you need to make them active, and then only then can they go and share it with 10 of their friends. Yeah. So there's this cycle, and there's many steps of that process, and if even one of those is broken, you're not going to get virality. Yeah. Right? So you need to start tweaking little bits, and then at a certain point, it starts to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way you see it, because, for so long, when growth hacking was kind of in its infancy, we thought, oh, the viral coefficient. We just need some little, quick hack, some little add-on to the site, some little thing we do in 10 minutes that just gives us viral growth. But the way you see it, the viral coefficient is itself a little mini funnel that you have to really take care of and look at and understand. And so even viral growth isn't as simple as it looks. And that's only the little piece above the surface that had a lot going into it. I think that's a holistic way to look at it. I think it's a wise way to look at what growth hacking really is.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just think, I think it is a science, or I think that there are aspects that can become a science, and it's more useful for people who are trying to build their own companies and who want a better shot of getting a successful product. I'm not saying that at the end of the day there's not a lot of luck involved, because there probably is. But there are people who have been able to do this successfully and repeatedly, and I think that's a good indicator that there's a skill here and a science. And so, it's better to say, how do we get a higher conversion rate on the site than how do we get more virality, right? Because there's no obvious answer to the second question, because you don't even know where to start.
No, I think that's great. Start with what you can actually influence, not the unknowns that really can't be penetrated. I'm really interested in what you're doing with GrowHack, and for a couple reasons. One of the reasons I'm interested in GrowHack is because for so long, a startup could go to a dev shop and say, hey, here's the specs, build me a product. And there was a designer, and there was a developer, and there was a team of people, and they could go and they could build that product and say, here, startup, here's what we made for you to the specs. But there's never really been a shop you could go to and say, I have a product, but I got the Eric Ries first part done, right? But I don't know where to go next, right? I got the lean startup, but I don't have the lean marketing, because no one's filled in that blank yet. And not only have they not talked about it or filled in the blank, there's definitely no place where I can go and hire somebody to do it. That's even a further stretch of the imagination. And yet almost you've kind of leaped two things, at once. You've defined the second half of the equation as the lean marketing and where Eric needs to go from there. But then you've also given them the tools of, look, me and my partner, the academic and the consultant, we can come together and actually help you to kind of bridge that gap and go there. And so I know that you get a lot of inquiries of people wanting to hire you, and they should. I mean, given your track record as an individual, given your track record at other companies, you should be in high demand. So let's do a little mock consulting session, all right? As best we can here. Obviously, it'll be vaguer than we want it to be because we don't have specifics of a real company, but I want people to know kind of what you would do for them and with them if they were to come to you. So if a company came to you and you decided that, yes, you're going to take them on as a client, it seems interesting, they have the budget for it, et cetera, what's kind of the first thing you would do to assess their current position, to assess where they're really at in the marketplace? What do you look at when they come in the door?
Yeah. Oh, well, so beyond just making sure that they're on board and that they understand sort of what the goal is, you'd be surprised how often you end up having to deal with teams that aren't on the same page, right? And disagree about that. Well, so you often find teams of people where one person is responsible to, like, investors, for example, and needs to make investors happy and make sure that the metrics are actually going in the right direction. Whereas the product person, for example, might have this like Steve Jobsian attitude of, I know what's right and I'm going to follow my gut.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to be successful for us. And while, I mean, there's some people really have great insight and have a really great design aesthetic. You need to be humble enough to understand that sometimes your gut is wrong. And the only way to know the right answer is to actually try it, and to be open for testing. Otherwise, it just ends up becoming, arguing again about what's right, wrong, and that's a really hard question to answer.
Yeah.
As Steve Blank says, there are no facts inside the building.
That's right. Customer development happens outside the walls.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so beyond that point, though, the first thing is almost always, like 90% of the time, is making sure they have some sort of system in place for starting to measure the stuff. I mean, most or a lot of growth hacking is testing things, and unless you know whether you're testing different acquisition channels or different pages or different value propositions, unless you have some sort of system that you can then plug that test into, where it can track what the variations are and what they're doing, you're just sort of guessing, right?
Well, let's go into that a little bit, because I know the people watching this interview, they're going to be saying, okay, like, tell me how to do that. Like, what systems do I put into place? Is it just Google Analytics? Is it more than that? What does it look like when you come to them and say, look, we need to put this in place and this in place? Is it in-house code? Is it dropping a snippet from Kissmetrics? Like, what is it you're really doing there to get the data you need as a growth hacker?
Yeah, so the big shift and what a lot of people don't really get about the tracking is you want to be tracking transactions or events rather than just page views.
Okay, explain that to me.
So a lot of people are familiar with like the Google Analytics type of analytics tracking, where you're tracking the number of people that hit a certain page, right? So you can see, okay, 1,000 people hit our homepage, 100 people hit this blog page. People get kind of distracted by that, but then they don't know what to do, so they just sort of chase page views. Okay. That's, first of all, the big problem there is that it's aggregated, and so you're not able to follow one specific user from place to place. You're following groups of users.
Yeah.
Right? All of the users who hit the homepage, all of the users who hit the other page. But that doesn't let you do the kind of testing and really understand a user the way you need to. Yeah. So I usually recommend Mixpanel. I'm a huge fan of Mixpanel as an analytics system for a few reasons. They're really smart guys. They're a new company out of Y Combinator. I've seen the product evolve a lot in the last few months, and it's already doing things that none of the other analytics systems will let you do. I'll give an example of that in a second. But so you had Google Analytics, which is like page tracking. Kissmetrics was the first company that really pioneered like event-based tracking. And the way that works is basically a tiny snippet of JavaScript code that you can put in your application when an event happens, and it pings Kissmetrics, their servers, and keeps track of some event happened. So it'll say, this happened from this user. And so then Kissmetrics, or whatever system you're using, is now tracking users and the different events that are taking place. And then they've got a dashboard where you can create funnels or start to dissect different groups of users to see what users are doing what kind of events. So Kissmetrics really led the sort of the front on that. I haven't seen their product evolve very much in the last few years. I think they've become a pretty mature company, and they're focused a lot now on the enterprise and the sales process. And I've seen Mixpanel come about recently and do the same thing, but then add some really cool stuff on top. Specifically, some things that Mixpanel lets you do now is do event-triggered like emails and in-app notifications. So now you can not just track users and what they do, like this user signed up, this user signed back in a week later, this user updated the profile. Now you can have it say, if a user hasn't signed in 7 days, send them this email that says, hey, we miss you. You should come back and you should do this.
So Mixpanel can actually send the email now.
Yeah, or you can plug it into your application so that it can feed into, if you've got a news feed or some sort of notification system in your application. It can ping users within that, so then the email looks like it's coming from you or whatever. So that's something that tools like, you used to have to go to tools like Intercom.io or Customer.io to do that, but now it's integrated into the analytics system. So I think that's really like a very cool step in the next direction.
Yeah, I didn't know it could do that personally, and I'm going to go back and implement that in half a dozen products in
awesome.
like the next few hours if possible. Because I've built so many custom from scratch using SendGrid or our own servers. When this event happens, do this. It is completely frustrating getting all that working. So I'm excited about that. And I actually have Neil coming on the program next week, so I'm going to prod him a little bit and see what's around the corner for Kissmetrics and what they're going to do to kind of stay ahead of the curve.
That sounds awesome. Like you mentioned about the building your own system, a lot of the original growth hackers had to do that, right? And that's where companies like Kissmetrics and Mixpanel really came about. So it's easy enough to set up an analytics system these days, although at a certain size, a lot of people end up building it themselves anyway. And that's because doing that allows you the flexibility to do some things that these systems don't let you do. Specifically, the thing that's really hard to do these days is A/B testing of the product itself. Adding a specific feature to a subset of users and seeing how that affects usage of the product. You can do A/B testing with Unbounce or with Visual Website Optimizer, any of these other tools for the landing page, but it's hard to do at the product level these days still.
Yeah, that makes sense. But you would have to have a pretty big user base to start building really in-depth custom analytics, kind of like that, right?
Absolutely.
So, for a lot of startups, Mixpanel, Kissmetrics, Google Analytics, that kind of trio really gives them enough data to start with.
Yeah, and more I call them growth hacking automation tools. If you 5 years ago or 3 years ago, if you're a growth hacker, you would have had to build this out yourself, which is another reason why you'd have to be really tech savvy. But these days, you can do a lot of this stuff using tools that people are building for you that are really, really good. And so if you know about the right ones and you know how to use them, then you're already going to have a lot under your belt. I know how to code websites, and I still use Unbounce for building landing pages just because I can do it in half an hour.
Same here. We actually have Unbounce coming on the program next week too, so I can give them props for the good work they're doing because they're saving us time.
Great.
So when you get all this data back, you see kind of what the metrics are telling you. You're looking at the events instead of just the users as one whole big pool of people. You start to put together a strategy of what to do. Does your strategy almost always look the same? Is it pretty typical that, yes, we're going to do this, and then this, and then this, that the events are kind of telling us what we already knew we were going to do because this is just kind of the way it always is? Or is it just completely random, purely chaotic, and every startup is 100% different? Tell us how you see it as a consultant, because I want to get inside your mind a little bit on how similar these startup needs are or how different.
Yeah, so to some extent there is stuff that's very similar across all of them, but that's only because a lot of startups are making the same mistakes. That's to be expected because a lot of people who are starting startups are not necessarily experts at running businesses, right? So they've never done it before, and even if they are experts at some things, they may not be experts at like email marketing, for example, right? So there are always going to be a few gaps to be filled in. And that's something you can only really know the best practices from like kind of a gut level by being in the space a lot and really looking and observing at what the other startups are doing. We try to focus on one point at a time. So the key of setting the good point of setting an analytics system in place and think about it as a funnel is that you can identify what I call the bottleneck of that funnel, right? You're getting in users and you've got a funnel, but it happens one stage at a time, right? So there's no point in focusing on monetization if no one's signing up, right? If your activation rate is 1%, meaning the number of people of all the people coming to your site, only 1% sign up, that's pretty low. It doesn't matter what your retention rate is, right? Because first of all, like you're not going to have anyone coming in to actually be retained. But second of all, you're not going to have the amount of people to test out retention stuff on until you get people through the activation stage. So we're generally looking at it one stage at a time. Usually there's we look for upside. So you get a sense of when a metric could be improved by a lot.
Yeah.
It can be different per product, but generally speaking, if you are a social network and it's a product that's free to sign up for, you can get an 8% sign up rate is good, right? Yeah. A lot of startups see like a sub 1% sign up rate, and that would be a good sign that there's a lot that you can do specifically on the page itself before you even worry about retention. But then, the idea is once you get it to a point where it's acceptable, like, say you get it to 8%. I've seen startups with upwards of 30% activation rate. So there's a lot that could be done, but you also end up sometimes spinning your wheels and not really being able to jump to the next stage. So if you can get it to like 8%, well, you might start to get the sense that like, okay, let's leave this where it is and now focus our attention on retention. If you've got 10% retention rate, good can sometimes be 20 to 30% retention, right? Obviously, depending on the product. So sometimes products don't really care if people come back because it's like set it and forget it. Yeah. Whereas with social networks, you want as many people to come back on the first day as possible. Yeah. So you let the funnel be your way of knowing where you should focus your resources, because as a startup, you don't have the resources to focus on all of those stages.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, so a lot of startups are not doing email well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, give me the list. Like, what are they failing at? So that as they're listening, they can go, yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. So email, what about email are they not doing right?
What I see, people, email is extremely underrated, right? People think of email as old school. They say like, we're going to sort of try to break the mold and go to the next level. Email really works, and there's been no successful startup that didn't figure out their email strategy. What I see most startups do is send one welcome email when a user signs up, and then that's it. And then they are surprised when a user never comes back. Yeah. Right. The problem is that how many websites do you visit every time you go on the internet? You probably go to the same 5 every single time.
Yeah, I need to be reminded of the other ones that I already used to like.
Even if you like it, like unless you're literally like poking someone and getting them to come back to your site, I like to think of the old rule of like 7 to 10 repetitions of a message before someone gets it. Yeah. So try to get them to come back at least 7 times before they'll ever think of going to your site on their own. Yeah. Right. So if you're only sending a welcome email, well then why would they ever come back? Absolutely. Send an email. I like to think at least 3 days later, 7 days later, and then 21 days later.
And what do those emails have in them? What are you telling them in those emails for, just a typical company?
So there's 2 styles of emails really. There's they call it like a drip marketing, where you just sort of set the emails in place, and this email, it's like a campaign. This email goes out 3 days later, 7 days later, 21.
So it's a set number of days it's going out. It has nothing to do with their interaction with the site at all. It's just it's going out on a set schedule no matter what.
And that's what you mentioned is the second kind of email, which is notifications of things that are happening within the application. Yeah. Those can be really effective. That's just a little harder to set up, technically speaking, so that involves a little more product development generally. Yeah. But at the very least, it's like thanks for signing up, right? And reinforcement of what the value is, good feelings. But you want to make sure that there's one clear call to action with each email, and generally it's here's why you should come back to our site. Yeah. Right. In the case of Quora, it's like your weekly digest. Here's an answer you might like. Click this link. Come back to our site. Right. So it should be like, pretty short. Here's why you signed up in the first place. A button. Come back, and then that could be 3 days later, 7 days later. You can come up with any number of different ideas of how to get people to come back. Yeah. And, that's one of the jobs of a growth hacker. Just
being creative, yeah.
If you have 2 ideas, don't put them both in one email. Send them separately.
Or A/B test them.
Yeah, or A/B test which one works better. Absolutely.
Do you recommend having both kinds of campaigns, or should you really just pick one and run with it? Should it be event-based or drip, or can you do both, or is it overwhelming? What has been your experience? What do you recommend? I
say start with drip initially. Eventually, it makes a lot of sense to go to the notification kind of stuff. What works really well is if you have someone in their first usage of the product seed something that will be the catalyst for them coming back again.
Yeah.
The classic case is like Zynga. With the first time you play Farmville, within 10 minutes you've planted your crop, and then you have to come back 4 hours later or the next day to harvest it. OkCupid has you, during the onboarding flow, has you message a user, right? Just say, hey, if you can be like 95% sure that if you message a user and that person gets a response, that person's coming back to the site to read what that response is.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you can say, hey, something you set up is now ready for you to check it, then they're going to be coming back. That's sort of how Quora does their email digests, is they get you to follow people and follow topics the first time you're using it. But it can be pretty technically involved inside. I would say just focus on drip marketing at first. Yeah. At least something to get people to come back.
Because drip you can set up easily within MailChimp or any of these simple third-party applications. Campaign Monitor, whatever it may be, Constant Contact. So drip is really easy to set up on a small budget with no resources. And then as you grow, you're integrating the mixed panel kind of event notifications. You're integrating some custom tools. But I think you're right. Email is so underrated and so important. If people walk away with anything from this interview, I hope it's that. I hope it's that get an email strategy, because it is monstrously important. Well, let me give you a chance to brag for a minute. Tell me some of the big wins you've had for some of the people you've helped, maybe through GrowHack or even before it was called GrowHack. What's some of the things that you can say, that was a big win for them? But then more so, what I'm really interested in is, what did you do? What's the action items we can take away to go and maybe have some of those big wins if it's a relevant enough example?
Yeah, so some of the more interesting and creative stuff that may not be as applicable as, like, we did a conference for a company, Social Activities Summit. That was big. Awesome. Sometimes that's what you need. We had one company win a Guinness Book of World Record.
Really? Did you come up with the idea of what they were going to win and then kind of coach them through the process of winning it? Or
no, it was sort of just the realization that, hey, I think we might have broken a world record here, and it turned out to be true.
Wow.
But the more interesting stuff is, I often teach a class, and then I have students email me and say, hey, I applied just 3 of your things, and someone emailed me the other day that here's a company, they do $100,000 in sales a month, just selling furniture online. They increase their sign-up rates of people who come to their site from 5% to 25%. And that was as simple as just having this modal overlay on the page, this pop-up when a user came there, asking for their email address.
Yeah.
That works really well with a lot of companies. In fact, Quora does that with when you click on an answer, and Groupon does that before you can check any deals.
Yeah.
What else is there? Oh, with one of my clients, we did a simple homepage redesign. They were focused a lot on content, and so their homepage of the site was just articles. A lot of times I see startups make this mistake where they want people to see the value of their product before they ask them to sign up. And I think while that's well-intentioned, you often don't need to show people very much before you can get them to sign up for something. And sometimes showing them more information will decrease your conversion rate because people get distracted.
That's
and
what 37 Signals found that out with their conversion test that they did. Yeah.
That was interesting.
It was very.
So we redid their homepage. The big thing was that we cut out the number of questions they were asking in the sign-up process, down from 25 questions to 4. Yeah. Right? Just name, email.
Should you get it as low as you can?
Absolutely. As low as you can. Start with there, and only then you can start introducing and testing things you might add, only if you think it's going to be valuable later. As a baseline, ask for someone's name, email, and a password. That's really all you need. Yeah. They can log in with their email. You may not even need someone's name, really, but it's kind of just standard to ask for it. You can personalize emails that way.
Yeah.
That's going to give you your highest conversion rate. Then you may, play around with introducing a connect through Facebook feature during the sign-up process. That may decrease conversions, but the fact that people connect through Facebook may down the line increase the amount of sharing that they're doing, and so the two, you may end up getting a more engaged user, or more through virality at the end of the day, right? So that's why it's important to have a sense of the entire life cycle, right, and not just focus on one thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, those are great tidbits of information. That's exactly what I was looking for, because people don't realize that sometimes growth hacking, it can be very intense and difficult, and it takes a lot of knowledge. But then sometimes the specific things that work are actually kind of easy to implement sometimes. It took a lot of knowledge to know why that mattered, but then once you do it, it's not that hard sometimes. So those are some great takeaways.
Sometimes you don't know why it matters. Like green buttons convert better. I have no clue why.
That's an interesting thing that I've been thinking about kind of in my free time, is that part of growth hacking is understanding that the data is pointing somewhere, but not always needing to understand why the data is pointing there. So something can be happening, and as long as you're understanding that it is happening, you don't need to know why it's happening, because your job is to kind of harness that lightning in a bottle and not understand the mechanics of lightning.
Yeah, that's certainly true. When it comes to especially a lot of landing page optimization, green buttons and orange buttons converting best, red headlines in I think Tahoma font converts best, weird stuff like that. But then there's some other really interesting examples of when it's important to try to figure out what's going on. There was one company I worked with where they had a really low conversion rate, and they couldn't figure out why. And only until they actually brought in sample people to actually walk them through the process and figure out what they were thinking at each stage, did they realize that it was a free product, but no one believed that it was free because it was so awesome. They had done such a good job convincing people to use it that people were skeptical, right? And so no one finished signing up.
That's
right?
Hilarious,
yeah.
So what is the fix there to make it seem like you're doing less than you really are, or just to convince them that it really is free somehow?
What they did was they ended up showing them two options. They had a paid version and a free version and they made it very clear what the differences are to make people very comfortable knowing, hey, there is a paid version and here's what they're interested in, but here's what I can get, and I can know that they're not going to try to scam me into something or try to sell me too hard on whatever.
Yeah.
That ended up working really well for them.
That's a really interesting example.
Yeah. Oh, there's another really fascinating one. There used to be 3 ways to get people to connect their Facebook accounts and then add friends through this Facebook integration. There was one big one with people's faces, one smaller one, and some third variation where there were a box on the bottom and on the top, and you could drag friends. One of these ended up getting 3 times as many friend ads. Wow. And it was totally unexpected. It wasn't the one with all the faces, which is what people usually think.
That's what I would have expected just now.
But what it turns out, and they only figured this out once they actually saw people do it, that the one that did really well was the only one where a user could just keep their mouse in the same place and just click and click, and the users, it would disappear and another one would come into its place.
Yeah.
Right? So very little work. You just click and you add. And people would add 30 friends. Yeah. Whereas the other ones, you had to move the mouse over and click and then click.
That's great. Yeah,
so
I love it.
Take that for what it's worth.
Absolutely. Well, as you're one of the few educators in the growth hacking space right now, I think, a couple of years that won't be the case, but right now it's a very short list. Tell us, what single thing has taught you the most about growth hacking? What one event or thing you read or thing you did or thing you tried kind of opened up your eyes the most, so that other people that are kind of trying to break into this industry can maybe recreate that themselves?
Well, that's a really good question. There's a lot of resources I point people to. What I really love is the Quora board on growth hacking, because it's really just people asking how the hell did Mint get 1.5 million users? They don't have a viral product. And then there's the head of product at Mint going well, here are the 7 things that we did.
Yeah.
Right. And you're okay, cool. And you start to pick apart some of the stories of what's happening. I would say there's that, and just the understanding that just don't go with the flow and just try to prove people wrong. You always want to be trying to prove people wrong. I have so many people in my classes who have such kind of a dogmatic belief about what will work and what won't work, so much so that they're not even willing to test out something to see if it'll work. And those are the kind of people that are missing out on a really big potential opportunity because they'll just assume that's not going to work for us.
Yeah, well, I think that is an incredible place to end the interview right there. I
Cool.
think that last bit of advice is gold. Don't make assumptions. Try things. Don't think you already know what's going to work, or you could be missing out on the thing that really will work. Mattan, you've done an incredible job with this interview. I think you've exposed a lot of things. You've taught a lot of things. You're going to educate a lot of people through this. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot, man.
Absolutely. Take it easy.
Later.